San Francisco. Good morning, San Francisco. There's a TikTok that I really
So you'll
like.
sound like a Weather Channel person.
There's a TikTok that I really like, and it's like this beautiful scenery music, and then it'll show like the Golden Gate Bridge and the roads, and it'll be like, good morning, San Francisco. But hi, friends. Welcome back to my YouTube channel. My name is Ashley Ariana, joined by the wonderful Marco from Clutch Team Sports. It is a beautiful Friday. It's supposed to be sunny all week, so I'm freaking having the time of my life. Sorry for starting a little bit late. If you're my dad, you're watching, and JD also put the eyeglasses up asking where we were. I was having some technical difficulty problems on the back end of some paperwork stuff. So I previously, on a show, I think with Stephanie, talked about how I didn't do my taxes for a really long time. Because I've been working since before it was legal to work, because I grew up in a small town. And they let you, my dad worked at the same little restaurant in the Russian River area. And so they let me work there when I was 13. And so, I had a full-time job there at college and everything, but I never knew how to figure out the paperwork, even though I think you just go to TurboTax and it's probably the most simple thing ever. But literally 2 years ago, and I'm almost 30.
Damn.
2 years ago is the first time I did taxes. And I was
have you been getting paid cash the whole time?
I got to a point, I was nervous that if I did my taxes, they would realize that I haven't done them, and then I would go to jail or something. But then I figured out that I actually just lost a ton of money. Because I wasn't making a lot. So I would have gotten tax returns, and I just never did. So that was a really upsetting realization that I had. The only reason I'm bringing that up is because paperwork bites the dust again, and I had a technical issue that Marco was helping me with. So that's why we're running a little bit late. But the 49ers had so much go on this week, and I love weeks like this when there's tons to talk about. I also like when we get to speculate and kind of make up narratives. But they had their second week of media availability at OTAs this week. I'm wondering if next week will be canceled. Kyle Shanahan has a history of canceling the third OTAs. So that'll be interesting to see if they do that. But I thought I would start off with, because Chris Sims, who, for people who don't know, he is a former quarterback. He and Kyle Shanahan are best friends. They have matching tattoos. And I know that means a lot.
Isn't it on their butt, huh? They have matching tattoos on their butt, I think.
I have this tattoo right here, and then this tattoo. Sorry for my heel; it's really dirty. I was just walking around in, I don't know where the camera is. I was walking around in sandals, so my heel is kind of dirty. But I have two tattoos. They're both matching with my best friend Lacey, so I know what a big deal matching tattoos are. And Chris Sims and Kyle Shanahan, they have matching tattoos. I would assume that they converse about football, the NFL, all that. My dad said he's watching now. Hi, Daddy, I love you. He's probably listening to my rant about being late and about taxes, and both of them, his head is exploding because my dad is former military. He always put it in my head. He was like, if you're on time, you're late. You got to be early. And I think my adult brain rebelled against that, and now I'm late to absolutely everything on accident. But anyways, Chris Sims, he puts out a quarterback ranking chart every single year. From everything I've heard, it's not very clickbaity. He actually puts a lot of time and effort into these rankings, and he tries to do his best to describe why he ranks quarterbacks where they were. You and I have done plenty of talking about what kind of quarterback we consider Brock Purdy, about where we assume the 49ers put Brock Purdy, just based on Jed York talking about his eagerness to pay him, on Kyle Shanahan and the few comments he's made, especially comparing those comments to how he's talked about former quarterbacks he's had. So, $50 to $60 man next year. And Chris Sims has Brock Purdy at 17th, which to me is kind of low. And I think maybe he's even kind of low to you. And I think people would consider you a Brock Purdy hater, which is just so funny. Not like, and we'll get into it more, but it's so funny, like, when you're in the 49er like fan base, media space, like if you rank Brock Purdy 15th, people will probably call you a hater. But then you go outside of it, and people have legitimate reasons to put him even lower. JD rates Chris Sims with a bunch of thumbs down, so he's saying boo, tomato, tomato, tomato at Chris Sims. Chris Sims, I don't know if you have the description, but talked specifically about Brock Purdy's arm strength, about his throwing motion being sloppy and long, about him not being able to get the ball down the field consistently. And then specifically, he described the Super Bowl scenario and saying if you had a top 10 quarterback in that Super Bowl, if the 49ers had any top 10 quarterback, they would be Super Bowl champions right now. And I think that was at least what Chris Sims based a good majority of where he ranked Brock Purdy on. I think when he looked at some of the other quarterbacks.
He also, but no, what he also did too, though, is he also ranked Brock Purdy in terms of, so he does categories, right? And this is something Chris Sims has always done. He's always done categories of quarterbacks. Like he doesn't just do a pure top 10 or top 32 list. He does a ranking system. And with that ranking system, he has a category. And Brock Purdy was put in the category of good quarterback, but he even said the emoji he would use it's like the emoji with the hand right here, like thinking, like there's caveats to him, like there's questions that are there. So I get the category he's in. I don't agree with being 17th, but also Chris Sims is talking about a couple of things when I was listening to it. One of the things that I took notice is Chris Sims isn't trying to disrespect Brock Purdy. Now, it comes off as disrespect, right? Because as a Niner fan base, we don't like to allow people to talk about our quarterback, right? And I was saying this yesterday with Jesse, is there's two different ways you could evaluate Brock Purdy, right? A lot of the 49er fan base, and this is something Chris Sims mentioned, and I was like, okay, I get where he's coming from and why he's being so critical of Brock Purdy. He talked about how a lot of people like to call Brock Purdy an elite quarterback or a top 5, top 10 quarterback and putting him up there amongst the Mahomeses and the Josh Allens. And he mentioned that on his show, and he talked about that being something that when he watches, he doesn't see Brock as being one of those top elite guys, right? So I think what factored into Chris Sims being so critical was the fact that a lot of 49er fans and a lot of media or some media puts him in that category where now Chris Sims is holding him to this super high regard. And when you watch the film, I see what he's talking about in terms of when we played the Packers, there was drop pick sixes. When we played the Lions, there was misreads and XYZ. And if we had a top 10 quarterback, and I said this on the show with you before, if we had an elite quarterback in the Super Bowl, we should win. Now, that doesn't mean that Brock Purdy played bad in the Super Bowl. That's not what I'm saying or what Chris Sims is saying. He's just saying a top 10 or an elite quarterback wins that game for the 49ers. And I sort of agree with Chris Sims there, but I also disagree because the way Chris Sims was wording things was sloppy. Like he used the word sloppy at one point. I don't think
sloppy throwing motion, which I
don't think Brock has a sloppy throwing motion. Like now I do get what he's saying in terms of long release. Now what I took from that, and I'll hear what you have to say, but you notice Brock load up when he has to put extra on a throw or extra strength on a throw, whether it's a tighter window throw or it's a deeper throw. You see him set his base wider and like lock and load and have to give extra torque. So I don't know if that's what he's talking about, but it's not a concern. It's not as bad as Chris Sims was talking about. And so I think that's where the thing was with Brock. It was more so he took a lot of what people were saying in terms of how elite Brock is, right? Like he says this multiple times, like, oh, Brock is mentioned by Niner fans as elite or next to Mahomes and Allen. And I think that's what went away from it. Because if you talk about Brock in the sense of all NFL, he's a damn good quarterback. And as much as I like harp on and like to criticize Brock for some things, when I talk about Brock with other fans, it's usually in a higher regard because throughout the NFL, quarterback play last year was down. I thought Brock played really well. So I think that's where I'm at with it. But when you have people say Brock is as good as Mahomes and Josh Allen and these top quarterbacks and they use the statistics, that's where the conversation changes. And I think that's why it felt like Brock Purdy was extremely disrespected from that Chris Sims segment.
I completely agree. And Tribe says it's not right that they trashed Brock Purdy like that. And I understand you're saying didn't feel like it was trashing him. I like this comment because I think specifically narrowing down on that Super Bowl, Brock Purdy, in my opinion, was just not even close to the top of why the 49ers didn't win.
No, absolutely.
And I understand what he's saying is like an elite quarterback overcomes these issues, but I don't necessarily know if that's true when we think of Josh Allen, who's had to wear the entire, Buffalo regime on his own sleeve. Like he's never been able to get to the Super Bowl because as a quarterback, even though, I would definitely I'd rank Josh Allen top 5, top 3 probably. Top 3, top 5, I don't know, depending on how Joe Burrow's doing. I feel like I don't want to get into that, but I think Josh Allen is an elite quarterback, and he, in my opinion, is a perfect example of how quarterbacks need to have a team around them. Tom Brady just recently went on the radio and was talking about how pivotal he feels like the offensive line is and how he doesn't think he could have won a Super Bowl without such a good offensive line. And that years where his offensive line was struggling, he felt like he could not wear the whole thing. He agreed that, yes, sometimes sacks are on the QB, and obviously the quarterback needs to take some ownership of that. But he said, like, it takes a team, like it takes elite playmakers catching the ball. It takes an offensive line to block for you. And even now that we're moving towards more mobility and escapability within the quarterbacks, you still need to have time to get the ball into your offensive weapons' hands. And to say that the quarterback should overcome all of that, I just don't think is completely fair. And really quickly, maybe I should, because I also want to go into Jordan Love is ranked above Brock Purdy, which I'm fine with that being a debate. I disagree, but I can like listen to the arguments when it comes to if they both were to reach their potential. But I think what bothers me about this reasoning, if Chris Sims is going to make this ranking for this year, we're not talking about potential. We're talking about right now. And I don't understand how you can be more harsh on Brock Purdy for losing this or for not like overcoming his team and like winning the Super Bowl, but you're not going to be as hard on Jordan Love for quite literally throwing an interception and like it really being on him for why they lost in the NFC.
Yeah.
And the reason I feel like that's important is because I'm going to read part of his quote. This was obviously from a longer segment. So for people who want to watch that, I would definitely encourage you guys to go do that. But just a quick little segment for him for Chris Sims kind of explaining why he put Brock Purdy at 17. He said he had no business winning the divisional playoff game this year. None. He should have had 4 interceptions at least. He hit Green Bay in the chest at like 5 different times. He missed people open everywhere. He wasn't that much better in the Lions game and, of course, in the Super Bowl. What I would say to a lot of people, if you had a top 10 quarterback, you won the Super Bowl. The 49ers are Super Bowl champs. There were a few plays and throws in that game that I go, no, that's not a top 10. The upper tier quarterbacks that sometimes I hear 49ers fans try to say Brock Purdy would be in, I'm assuming in their league. I would go, no, you would have a Super Bowl if it's in that case. And I think what you were pointing out in your like little discussion or response is it might be more so that Chris Sims is pushing back against like the fan narrative that
I think it is
elite versus him trying to like it's almost like because I think you find yourself in this situation sometimes where people will call you a hater, but it's because someone comes in and they're like, he's the next Joe Montana. And you're like,
yeah,
okay, no. And then you have to be kind of harsh. And it's like, okay, I wouldn't be this harsh if you weren't like putting the expectations way up here. Like we could just
Yeah, because like
discussion.
so like what I got from when I got from what Sims was trying to say was because he mentioned the fan base multiple times and people holding him to like a high regard and calling him an elite quarterback. So like he's holding him to the elite standard, right? And to the elite standard, if we're being honest, you could go back and you could watch every single playoff games outside of the second half from the Lions game, and you could say Brock Purdy did not look like Brock Purdy from the regular season. Like
Yeah.
you could have that argument, and you could truly say Brock Purdy from the regular season to Brock Purdy in the playoffs outside of the second half in the NFC Championship game to beat the Lions. He wasn't Brock Purdy, and when you could go and look at stats, I'm going off of the film, but if you want to look at stats, his passer rating was an 88.3 in the regular season. It was like 113 or 115 in that range. So like you see the drop off. So like I get where Sims is coming from. But I think it's more so he's attacking the narrative of fans and people putting Brock Purdy in that top 5 echelon of he's up there with the Mahomeses, the Allens, because he mentions that, like, mentions top 5, top 10. And, like, I think that's unfair to Brock, right? Because what Sims is doing, and it's unfair for me as well when I talk about Brock, because we're using the Niner fans narrative of being elite. Well, when we look at the entire NFL, they're not calling Brock elite yet. They're saying Brock is within like that 10 to 15 range, and he could be a top 10, a top 5 quarterback within next year. So like, I felt like Sims as a national media guy probably should have taken the approach of how the entire NFL is viewed as quarterbacks versus the fan perspective. You know what I mean? Like, it's different because Sims probably does watch a lot of 49er football because his best friend is Kyle Shanahan.
Mm-hmm.
It's something that Jesse mentioned yesterday, and I thought was a great comment by Jesse, and then we didn't get to elaborate on really. But is Chris Sims doing this to elevate Kyle Shanahan? Like, is he making Brock Purdy? He called Brock Purdy the Tua of the West Coast. Is he doing this to elevate Kyle Shanahan? Like, that to me is more of a conversation than anything, because when he does that, it's like, wait, Chris, well, hold up, because Brock's much better than Kyle Shanahan. Like, I don't get what you're doing when it comes to calling him that or saying that he's not good or XY. Like, that to me just blows my mind, where he was completely attacking everything about Brock Purdy. It was all criticism. And it's like, wait, there's a lot of positives from what we've seen from Brock this past season. Like, I get being negative or critical, but where's the positives? Where's that at? Like, that's where I'm like, wait, how can you just be critical? Like, and don't get me wrong, I'm very critical of Brock, and you know that. But I throw positive things in there because there's positive things that he's doing. Yeah, so it's like, I'm like, hey, and Chris, chill. That's a little disrespectful the way he was presenting it.
When you're bringing up that topic, this goes to, which is also my criticism of how he did the rankings, is with a lot of these guys, for example, he ranks Baker Mayfield above Brock Purdy, which I also find idiotic. But when he's talking about some of these people, because he has, like I just read a comment about him explaining why he ranked Brock Purdy there. He does this for all the quarterbacks. When he's talking about Baker Mayfield, he's talking about his year in a whole, and then he's even bringing in previous years. So he's talking about the totality of their career along with the totality of this season and saying, this is why I rank them here right now. With Brock Purdy, he focused mainly on the Super Bowl, which is why I like that you bring up their friendship, and originally why I brought up their friendship too, because in previous Super Bowls and championship games, when the 49ers have lost, they've had an excuse that is not Kyle Shanahan. Jimmy Garoppolo was thrown under the bus, and that was an excuse, not even an excuse. A lot of fans, national media, people got behind that. I think that it was even justified. But people were blaming Jimmy Garoppolo. When the 49ers lost to the Eagles, it wasn't Kyle Shanahan's fault. It also wasn't Brock Purdy being bad, but it was his
being on your fourth quarterback. Yeah,
that type of thing. Where this year, the prevailing narrative has seemed to be, okay, this is starting to become a pattern with Kyle Shanahan, and this is an issue. And they've been praising Brock Purdy, and Brock Purdy was leading, at least in all these statistical categories, in the MVP race. Maybe we should be looking at Kyle Shanahan, especially when you think about the crucial overtime decision making. I think a lot of people, both 49er players, fans, and then also like national media, have been more critical of Kyle Shanahan than I think they've been in any other 49ers offseason, where there's been other, to me, clear people to blame. So this to me kind of read, because when he was talking about Brock Purdy, he narrowed in on that Super Bowl game, which once again is a lot different from all the other quarterbacks he talked about, where he talked about their season in totality, where how you're saying when you talk about Brock, you give the negative, you give the positive. He focused in on that game a lot. And to me, it was almost like he used this opportunity to try to clear some of his friends, some of the like narrative made about his friend. I wonder if that is possible. And I don't even know that that's like conscious. That could just be subconscious. As his friend, maybe he does feel like a little bit like Kyle Shanahan is lifting up Brock Purdy. Then he sees everyone dogpiling on Kyle Shanahan. So just without even meaning to, he comes down as extra critical on Brock Purdy in efforts to protect his friend in this discourse that's been happening over him this past year. Do you think that that's possible?
Well, that's absolutely possible. I think he could be defending his friend without even realizing it, in the sense of he's putting out this narrative of Kyle Shanahan elevating, because we know what's happening in Miami. Tua's being elevated by Mike McDaniel and the weapons. Like it's visible on tape. It's visible every game you watch of the Dolphins. And that's not saying Tua's not capable of being a quarterback that could be a mid-level quarterback in this league. But essentially, like, I truly just felt like Chris Sims was just being a little over, like, disrespectful or critical. And I get what he meant by the Super Bowl. I just think he worded it wrong. Now, Brock wasn't the reason the Niners lost, right? But you want your elite franchise quarterback in that kind of game where the defense is giving you the ball at like the 40-yard line with a really good offensive play caller. You want them. You have to win that kind of game if you're a top 10 or you're going to be in that elite category at some point. Like that's where you make that jump from being a really good quarterback to being an elite quarterback. And I think that's more so what he was trying to say. I just felt like he worded it really wrong. I just felt like, I don't know. I felt like Sims was just I felt like it was a little disrespectful. And in the sense of Kyle could have been better in that Super Bowl, especially in overtime, could have been better in certain situations. So it's like, if we're going to be critical of the Super Bowl, mention your buddy. Hey, mention your buddy. Like, if you're going to be critical of the Super Bowl, and I felt like he stayed away from that on purpose. Because he mentioned, he mentioned, like, he focused purely on the postseason. And I guess that's where you would consider, like, what makes a great quarterback is their postseason run. It doesn't make Brock not a good quarterback. And the thing is, what's crazy is he never said Brock wasn't good. He said Brock is a good quarterback. There's just question marks that come with Brock. And I think that is true. We haven't seen.
It's interesting. Like, some of the things he said, it is fair. I just think I actually don't agree or don't disagree with like that statement. What I disagree with is him making that statement and then him talking about Baker Mayfield and somehow looking over Baker Mayfield's lack of performance in the postseason and ranking him higher. And I'm like, okay, well, this, like, same thing with Jordan Love. It's like he needs to have like a grading structure that he applies to everyone instead of like, you know, does that make sense? I don't know. To me, I'm
absolutely,
like,
that does.
That's why I would put, and someone, Phil wrote Brock Purdy's only 12 to 16 best QB in the world. It's not good enough, whatever. What I would say is I agree that Brock Purdy's not top 5. And I think that there's an argument for him to be anywhere from like 8 to 12. But I think putting some of the guys that Chris Sims has ahead of him, the logic doesn't like cross over. I think it's fine to criticize Brock Purdy and be like, yeah, Patrick Mahomes, maybe that's a bad example, because they were going against Patrick Mahomes. If Justin Herbert, what we assume Justin Herbert is, if Josh Allen, Joe Burrow, let's say he's healthy, if those guys were the quarterback of the 49ers, maybe they overcome some of the mistakes that were made by other guys on the team, and they can defeat Patrick Mahomes when the defense holds Mahomes to 19 points in regulation. Maybe that's what he's trying to say, and I can get behind that. Like, okay, a top 5 quarterback overcomes that. But for me, Brock Purdy's first full season, like as a starter, and he comes in and does that, I think it's extremely just harsh for him to ignore any coaching flaws. And I think that's also, I think it's interesting because he gives Brock Purdy the playmaker and the head coach, like those things take point. Those are reasons that Brock Purdy is ranked lower than a Baker Mayfield. For Chris Sims, is Baker doesn't have those weapons in that coach. But it's like, okay, if you're going to consider that a reason that Brock Purdy is probably being elevated higher than his play, that's fine. But when you're looking at the Super Bowl, please recognize that those weren't necessarily positives in that specific game. If we're looking at a season overall, of course, Kyle Shanahan and his system helps elevate a QB. In the Super Bowl, I think Kyle Shanahan has a history of choking and getting a little bit stressed and having multiple star players make mistakes. I don't think Brock Purdy benefited in that particular game. And if Niner Gang brings up the last 2 videos that were on Grant Cohn's channel made by an old Raiders head coach. It wasn't an OC, it was an old Raiders head coach. And I think that point was kind of addressed by him on that channel. If you guys
I think it was the OC. I think it was Tom Walsh. I think it was the OC. He was the OC with the Raiders. Yeah. I didn't want to say it was the same time as Tom Flores was there when they won the Super Bowl. But can you do me a favor? Can you pull up 2 comments? I want to address 2 comments. There's
of course
by Jonas. So Jonas talked about Brock being the 7th round pick.
Where's this? Brock Purdy shave this one?
No. So he's 7th rounder. So he talks. So Jonas mentions if Sims' friend Shanahan got his QB situation in order. No. It's actually farther up probably. So it's Marco. He starts with Marco. But the comment is Marco Purdy was picked in the 7th round and was coming off an elbow surgery. Let's judge him on a curve. And then he says, I felt like people judge him like he's been in the NFL since 2016. I get right that he's coming off. He's a 7th round pick, but check this out. That 7th round pick status,
that's not going to matter.
No, that 7th round pick status don't matter since the moment you're named the starting quarterback of a franchise. I don't care where you're picked. If you're the starting quarterback of a franchise, you're the starting quarterback. That means you're good enough to start. 2, coming off an elbow surgery, absolutely deserves to be talked about. But it's the moment, and this is something that I've had trouble with. It's the moment fans and media start calling Brock Purdy a top 5 quarterback or an elite quarterback. That's the moment that the curve is thrown out the window. Because now you're mentioning him with some of the greats, right? Mahomes has had injuries. Josh Allen has injuries. Like, they're having injuries throughout the season. So if we're going to grade them, do we grade them on a curve because they had a knee injury during the season or an ankle injury during the season and those kind of things? No, we're not looking at that stuff. That stuff gets thrown out the window because they're talked about as elite guys, right? Like, for example, no one's going to really mention, if Joe Burrow comes out fired and hot and playing great, they're not going to mention, he's coming back from an injury. No, they're going to say Joe Burrow is great and this is what they were expecting. So I think that's what it is in terms of, and I think that's where the disrespect comes from, or where people think is disrespect, is if we're going to hold a quarterback or someone to a category, right, then that's the bar, right? That if we're saying he's neck to neck with Mahomes and Josh Allen, and I've heard that many of times, that he's a top 2, top 3 quarterback. If we're going to hold him there, then let's hold him how we hold those elite quarterbacks, right? And how we talk about those elite quarterbacks. And I think that's the difference between everything. And if we want to talk about them as a whole and as an NFL ranking, you're gonna hear different perspectives from people regarding Brock Purdy.
I mean, I think that I agree. I think it's just like it just depends on what you're comparing him to, which is what's so funny about like ranking lists, right? It's like I think the 7th rounder thing is okay to bring up for right now. I think once he's paid, that's like no longer relevant. And yeah, when you're talking about maybe where he ranks, like I think you can bring it up just in the way that it's an impressive part of his story. But you're right. I don't think that like gives him extra credit points or anything like that. Matter of fact, you have to factor in, okay, why was he drafted in that way? You have to factor in lack of arm strength and stuff like that.
I would push back. Do we ever hear anyone, when they criticize Kirk Cousins, do we ever hear anyone say he was a 4th round draft pick? Because you're not expecting any quarterback drafted from round 4 to 7 to truly be the franchise quarterback that you're drafting. Truthfully, like you're really not. You're throwing a dart and hoping that becomes something. You don't hear anyone talk about these other quarterbacks in that aspect, right? Like, so I don't necessarily like draft pick, okay, but at the end of the day, we don't hear anyone mention, and we didn't hear them mentioning where certain quarterbacks have been drafted in the past. It's just because he was mystery relevant, and that's why he was even before Cousins was established. We never heard people say, "Oh, he's a 4th round quarterback." They evaluated him as a quarterback. Like they don't say, "Oh, he's undrafted," or "Oh, he's a," like you don't hear that. You didn't hear Dak talked about after his rookie year as a 4th rounder. Did I go away?
Oh my God. Oh.
Did I go up here?
Yeah, you were there. I was going to say polo, and then I realized that we've done that before, and I had to stop. Speaking of maybe where draft status gives you points or takes away points, I actually think that certain people, if we're going to use, Brock overcoming his draft status, I think also people who were drafted highly, maybe if they don't do as well, are looked at really critically because the expectation for them is so high.
That's true.
The reason I'm bringing that up is some people in the comments are talking about Trevor Lawrence, and Trevor Lawrence is ahead of Brock Purdy in Chris Sims' ranking list. And I, for right now, would disagree with that. I can see maybe the potential, but not even. I mean, the only thing that gives me hope with Trevor Lawrence eventually being better than Brock Purdy would be looking at like Matthew Stafford and him struggling when he was with the Lions and then going to the Rams and obviously overcoming a lot of that. But I think even with the Lions, Stafford was really able to show off his arm. I mean, he had leading wide receivers in the NFL. Like, it wasn't a question if Matthew Stafford had it. And I think right now, I mean, the Jaguars are questioning whether or not they should pay Trevor Lawrence.
I don't know if they're questioning it, though. I truly don't. Because when you watch the film on Trevor Lawrence, you do see Trevor Lawrence making some ridiculous high-level throws. You also see a lot of... But that's the thing, is consistency. But you also see...
I went golfing yesterday, and I learned that, like, consistent... I love the high highs, right? So I'm always like, okay, I'm an extreme person. Even with, like, I always used to use my hair color as an example in high school. I am naturally blonde, but I used to dye my hair like white. Like I wanted it like platinum blonde. And then I dyed it like dark brown, and that wasn't dark enough. So I dyed it black, and then I wanted it red, and then I wanted it platinum. I always wanted extremes. Like I'm really want high highs, even if that comes with low lows. But a golfer will tell you that it's actually better just to be consistent. Like being at 500 in golf is like good. Like having consistently good shots, you don't have to, if it's a par 3, which means it takes like 3 shots to get it in the hole, you'd rather get it in 3 shots 8 times in a row if they're all par 3s than get some in 2, but then others in 6.
Yeah, absolutely.
You want to be consistent. And I think that's the thing with quarterbacks. And that's the thing that I don't understand necessarily with Chris Sims' list, except for the fact that I guess NFL teams, I mean, still you're going after potential, so you are going for the boomer bust prospect. But my thing when I'm looking at guys like Jordan Love, when I'm looking at guys like Trevor Lawrence, we've seen the wow throws from them, even in the game against the Packers in the playoffs. We saw incredible wow throws from Jordan Love, but then you also saw really bad throws. And then you also saw just throws that were easy that he didn't do. And as 49er fans, and I'm not, obviously the disparity is large, but it kind of brings to mind Trey Lance, who was a guy who could make some amazing throws where you're oohing and eyeing, but then the layups there he was like not able to make. And because of that, he literally can't be a starting NFL quarterback. And obviously Trevor Lawrence and Jordan Love are miles better than that. But I'm just saying, like, just because we see that they have potential to be really good, we haven't seen these guys be consistent. We haven't seen them overcome the mindset aspect of it, which to me is a critical part of being a starting quarterback that maybe is like, because it's not necessarily like something that you can calculate, maybe it's not talked about as much, but I think that clutch factor and not completely breaking under pressure and like having that steadiness is really important. Now, what you might argue is there was a little bit of lack of steadiness in Brock Purdy in the playoffs. He was less steady than the Brock Purdy that fans have came to know and love. But in my opinion, he was still much more steady than a Jordan Love and then a Trevor Lawrence. And so in my then that's where I get angry just at the rankings. I can understand them, Chris Sims saying if they were all to reach their highest potential, these two would be ranked higher. But that's not what he's doing. He's saying, where are they right now? And let me rank them right now. And right now, I don't understand how those guys.
What a lot of people do too, though, and which is interesting, is when they talk about young quarterbacks, right? It's usually like, oh, he needs a weapon or he needs a playmaker to see what he truly is, right? We've seen the Eagles do it with Jalen Hurts that year. That year he went crazy. We saw what other teams have. The Bengals do it to go get Joe Burrow a weapon. We've seen every team, like, they try to get their quarterback a weapon. Truthfully, Trevor Lawrence hasn't had a weapon in the passing game, in my opinion. I mean, we could talk about Calvin Ridley. You could mention Calvin Ridley, but Calvin Ridley was coming off a complete season suspension. So it's like, how much is Calvin Ridley? He was also dropping extreme passes. We've seen Christian Kirk. Everyone was like, he's not a number one receiver. He's more of a receiver 2, receiver 3. No, he's done good. Don't get me wrong, but it's not like he's that.
Made fun of his contract, but he like showed up. I felt like
he showed up his first year. Christian Kirk did. After that, he kind of went back into who he truly was, and I think it was because he was just force fed the ball that 2022 season where he just went over 1,000 yards, and so you could argue like, hey, maybe Trevor Lawrence doesn't have the weapons, and that's why. But I honestly think like the film that Trevor Lawrence has is better than most people talk about. Like Trevor Lawrence is talked about how he is because he was talked about in the sense of Trevor Lawrence is the next Andrew Luck. Andrew Luck was
he definitely
damn
really
great quarterback before he got injured. So like those expectations were set here, and he's here playing here, and that's why there's a big gap on how he's talked about. So that's why I think why everything's going how it is.
Can I ask you why do you think Kyler Murray is ranked? Like, it seems to me that Chris Sims is judging traits more than he's judging actual play at this point. Because Kyler Murray has more wow plays and maybe more wow factor, like things that stand out over the course of a season. He'll have a few, but game by game, when we're talking about consistency, I don't think Kyler Murray recently, the last, let's say 2 years, touches, and I'm not counting when he's injured, but when he's been playing over the last 2 years, I don't think he touches Brock Purdy's consistency. And Kyler Murray's also ranked above Brock Purdy.
Kyler Murray's in an interesting situation, right? Like, I think Kyler Murray, he puts on some phenomenal play, but like you're saying, like, it is consistent, but it's also, he shows you some things. I think his biggest issue is he hasn't been able to get to the playoffs consistently. His biggest thing is, again, aging. He had aging Larry Fitzgerald, and then after that, no really true weapons. Also had a bad coaching staff. So that his situation is complex. But I agree with you. I don't think he's above Brock Purdy in terms of if we're grading off of last season, because you only saw a limited reps from a Kyler Murray last season. We don't know how fully healed that ACL is, even though we saw him running around looking like Kyler Murray. So it's very questionable in terms of what they're looking for and what he's grading. Like, truthfully, at the end of the day, it's his grading system, right? So we can't say like, oh, you're 100% wrong, because he's backing himself up with his own evidence, right? So it's like, hey, shout out to you. Tip my cap off to you. You could back yourself up with your own evidence. So that's where I'm like, you know what? You backed yourself up with what you think is your evidence. And I think that's where it comes to have more so a conversation rather than just saying, you know what?
Yeah, like
he's right or wrong. Yeah, like, you know, like it's
like,
he
just
was
like,
able to
agree with his premise more so than like that makes sense.
Like he was at least able to give you. He was at least, the thing was crazy is he was at least able to give reasons on why Brock's at 17. Right? I have people where I have conversations with, and they tell me Brock's a top 3 quarterback, and I ask why. And you know what? Their first thing they say, look at his stats. Stats don't tell me nothing, man. Because if we're being honest, he's thrown the ball 32nd in most attempts in the NFL, which is the worst in as an offense. So how do his stats look if he throws the ball more? Is he as efficient? Does it go down? Yes, the yards might go up, maybe the touchdowns go up, but we're likely to see something else and interceptions go up. We don't know what it would look like, right? So it's like, at least he's able to defend himself with some evidence. I
mean, I do think it's funny though. Like Chris Sims uses Brock Purdy's interceptions, which once again is different than his actual interceptions. He had very low interceptions, but he did rank higher in interceptable passes, which is just interceptions that weren't caught. But when you look at Patrick Mahomes, he had a high interception rate, but not high interceptions, which can be luck. It can be a problem with the other team they're facing. But once again, Jordan Love is ranked above Brock Purdy, and Jordan Love had more actual interceptions and had about equal percentage of interceptable passes. Mm-hmm. So it's like they both got lucky and they both had some interceptions. Jordan Love had more interceptions. How I like, especially when we're talking about, once again, going back to Chris Sims using a lot of his reasoning being about the Super Bowl. JD says, okay, well, Lamar Jackson hasn't won a big game in general. I don't know. Very interesting conversation. Maybe you and I can, you've probably done this before, but you and I can, we don't have to do this now. We can do it for next show, but bring a list of the quarterbacks we have above Brock Purdy. And do you know exactly where you have Brock Purdy ranked? I think I've done this before, and I had Brock at like 11, I think, but it was a little while ago.
I do, but I'm not going to give it now because we could save it for another show.
Really quickly, Raz says, come on, Lamar is a 2-time MVP champ. I don't want to get into this because it's going to start a huge argument, but I think that giving the MVP and not including the postseason blows my mind.
That's what's weird about the MVP. Like, I agree.
Like, to me, because I liked what you said earlier, is you were kind of behind Chris Sims using the Super Bowl because you were like, well, where is your legacy made? It's in the postseason. Joe Montana is Joe Montana. Steve Young is Steve Young. Tom Brady is Tom Brady. Mahomes is Mahomes. All these people, their regular season doesn't matter. When we look at Mahomes last year, people would be like, he's the best. And his regular season actually wasn't, I mean, it was very impressive. But compared to previous Mahomes seasons, it was not his best season. But then he went to the Super Bowl. The Chiefs put it in high gear, and you're like, oh yeah, he blows all the other quarterbacks over the water, So I think that's an interesting. See, Niner Gang says in the regular season, Lamar has questions to answer still. Interesting.
But we could also say that about Brock. He has questions to answer still, right?
Yeah, I agree.
Like we mentioned, like his rating. A lot of fans, like, I don't like to mention his rating because I don't really care for stats. When you turn on the film and you rewatch those games, you truthfully see Brock is not the same quarterback from the regular season to the playoffs outside of that one half. And that's just something I noticed, not even looking at the stats. We could question Brock in the rain. We could question Brock against a better defense. Like, so there's a lot to be questioned about. I just think it's a great conversation that Chris Sims brought up. I think Chris Sims is wrong on where he's ranked. I think he's wrong on where he's ranked. I think he was kind of the way he worded things was a bit disrespectful for my liking. So that's where I'm at. But essentially,
I like
that
JD saying Stroud and Burrow have something to I think a lot of these guys have something to prove. I just wish, and I think it's hard. I'm not even blaming Chris Sims on this. I think this is just, it's hard. Like, ranking quarterbacks is hard in general. But I agree. Like, when people talk about Stroud, and even I think would have Stroud above Brock Purdy right now. But if I wanted to critique myself, I would say, okay, 1 year, he's only performed for 1 year. Is this something that he can do consistently? He had same thing, very good coaching, very good defense, good playmakers, but also did he make those playmakers good? He had an incredible interception rate, but also he did the same thing as Brock Purdy, where he had a lot of interceptable passes that weren't intercepted. So I think and even like, how much do you count interceptions? Because I'd put Josh Allen top 3 to top 5, and Josh Allen has pretty high interception rate. But then you have to look at their situation and say, okay, why are there interceptions like that? So I think that the conversation is interesting, and it's hard to have the same criteria each quarterback, because all of their situations are different. I think a good way to judge it is like visualizing, when I'm ranking a quarterback, I'm going to say, would like CJ Stroud on the 49ers right now, Josh Allen on the 49ers right now, Tua on the 49ers. Like, I think Tua would be worse than Brock Purdy on the 49ers right now.
So I think he'd be the same.
You think he'd be the same?
Yeah, no, in the sense of he has a lot of weapons here. Kyle would be able to cater to him. So the stats are going to be the same, very similar. We see what Tua is now.
Tua does not have it mentally. Tua mentally.
Tua doesn't need to have it mentally. We saw what Kyle could do with Jimmy Garoppolo. You're telling me that Tua couldn't hand the ball off to Christian McCaffrey 25 to 30 times, throw dump offs to Brandon Aiyuk.
But that's what I'm saying. I think he could get to a similar place, right? Like Jimmy Garoppolo got to the Super Bowl, but it obviously looked different. Like when it
would look much different, but it would be.
So I think Tua would be worse on the 49ers, even if they got to the same place.
I think he might be better on the Niners, and I'm gonna tell you why. Because McDaniels, and I'm not saying he's going to be better than Brock. I'm saying Tua would be better than Tua is in Miami.
No. Okay, I agree with this.
I'm not saying that he's better. That he would be better than Brock in SF. He'd be a better version of Tua than Miami Tua. And the reason is Kyle doesn't have an offense that's pushing the ball downfield constantly or trying to push the ball downfield. Mike McDaniels Mike Daniels likes to be extremely aggressive, pushing the ball down the field. And I think that doesn't fit Tua's game, even though he has a great deep ball. I think that keeps defenses honest. But I think Kyle Shanahan with Brandon Aiyuk would eat over the middle with Brandon Aiyuk and Debo. That's Tua likes that kind of throw. Also, Kyle would be able to utilize the quick game with Debo and the slot. Like, I would think he would get more production from a Tua than Mike McDaniel than what he's getting right now.
Tua would die.
Tua has a worse offensive line in Miami than the Niners do.
No.
Yes. I watch the Dolphins weekly. The Dolphins O-line is shit compared to the Niners.
Tua cannot move, and Brock Purdy makes this offensive line look good. And I feel more emboldened in this statement than I ever have before after listening to Chris Forster talk about the offensive line and literally basically talk about how it's on the quarterback to avoid pressure and that they are perfectly fine settling for a serviceable or below serviceable offensive line.
I think So I think the Niners have a solid offensive line compared to the NFL, right? Yes, they do.
No.
If you look, yes, they do.
Average ranked offensive line.
If you look at the entire NFL's offensive lines are normally bad. No, I'm saying like
they're ranked at the bottom.
I get what you're saying. Statistically, the stats that they give them, I think stats for NFL offensive line play is shitty. All right. The reason is, right, you have a lot of quarterbacks in the NFL. For example, a guy like Mahomes, Lamar, their stats, those kind of quarterbacks, Josh Allen, their stats are going to be much better for their offensive line because they're able to do escapability things than other quarterbacks. Other quarterbacks get the ball out fast, XYZ. I just think when you look at the 49ers as offensive line as a whole, it's a better offensive line than what they're giving credit for. As a fan base, we watch the offensive line so often that we're like, okay, it's a bad offensive line. But if you were to go watch a team, Titans, Dolphins, a random team, you're going to be like, holy cow, the Niners offensive line might not be that bad. Truthfully, watching the Dolphins offensive line, you would literally say that offensive line is cheeks. It's cheeks.
No, I think it's a bad offensive line, but I think that if you were to put the offensive lines up against each other, that Brock Purdy would do a much better job. Like, I think Brock Purdy would make Miami's offensive line look better, and I think Brock Purdy makes the 49ers offensive line look better. Does that make sense? I think Brock Purdy's ability to escape and avoid pressure I think
you know why
might be saying it, but Brock Purdy is way more mobile than people give him credit for. Tua isn't.
But you know what Tua wins? Tua has the time to throw. It's the fastest time to throw in the NFL, 2.36 seconds. So that's where he would make our O-line better, getting the ball out quick. I know where I'm going with the ball because I'm on one. He's technically a one-read quarterback. As long as that read's open and Kyle Shanahan's offense, he's hitting it. Huh?
That's what I'm saying. That's bad.
No. Don't get me wrong. Don't get me wrong. No, I'm not saying he's good.
First one isn't open. He's screwed and getting his head thrown into the fucking cement.
But I'm saying that's where our offensive line wouldn't look as, I wouldn't say look as bad. It would look the same with Tua because he gets the ball out quicker versus I want to say Brock Purdy held the ball. I want to say and this is from the scramble. This is where scrambling and everything matters. 2.8. That's 0.5 of a second faster than Brock got the ball out. So you're going to see a different style of offense. You're going to see it would be Tua getting the ball as fast as he can versus Brock. He'll hold on to the ball because he knows he could escape a little bit and do a little bit more. But Tua is going to get the ball out faster. So I think our O-line would look just the same, to be honest with you. I don't think it would look much different.
I completely disagree. But I mean, this is just I guess there's no way to prove that. But I don't think
Tua's a good quarterback, by the way. I think Brock's better, but I think Tua does do things well that Kyle would take advantage of.
I think that if you want to say Kyle could make Tua look better than Tua looks now, I agree. Like Tua compared to himself, I don't think Tua would be as good as Brock.
Yeah, I never said that. I never said that. I never said Tua would be better than Brock in the Niners offense. I'm saying Tua would be better than the Miami Dolphins. So if Tua was on the Niners, Tua would be better than Tua on the Dolphins right now. Does that make sense? Like not better than Brock. I'm not saying he'd be better than Brock.
Yeah.
I don't think he would.
Yeah. And I think that's just what I was saying. Like when I'm ranking quarterbacks, because it's hard because they all have different systems. I like to think, how would this quarterback look in the 49ers offense with Kyle Shanahan with all their weapons as they are, and then rank from there. And that's why I would put Tua, I put Kyler Murray, I put Baker Mayfield below Brock Purdy because I think on the 49ers team, they would not be as good as Brock Purdy. Does that make sense?
I get what you're saying.
Yeah. But I think this segues us into a interesting conversation, which you might have already talked about, but I didn't. But coaches and players talked this week, and Chris Forser got some heat because he had an interesting, to say the least, statement about the 49ers offensive line, which gives some insight into how Kyle Shanahan, John Lynch, and the 49ers front office value offensive skill positions. And I guess we could have came to this conclusion just based on the fact that this was one of the best offensive tackles and offensive line drafts in history, and especially recently. And the 49ers didn't go up and try to get one, but their offensive coordinator or offensive line position coach gave some insight into why. On Wednesday, he was asked why the 49ers didn't take an offensive lineman early on in the draft. And would you mind me reading a little bit of his statement? Okay, so he said, this is my personal opinion, which, by the way, I think is an opinion that is shared by all of the coaches, including Kyle Shanahan. But he framed it that way. If they ask me, I say invest in guys who touch the ball. Guys like that can score touchdowns. Then there's a range of guys, second, third, fourth round, fifth round even, we can find starting offensive linemen in. At some point, you can draft them. Yeah, you draft Trent Williams, even though they traded for Trent Williams. You pick a draft where you're going to get a difference maker, or pick a offseason where you're going to trade for one. But there's guys that can make a difference that are in the later rounds. We can, and I'm paraphrasing because it was a long statement that he made, but he talked about how the 49ers organization can develop later round offensive lineman talent that they can draft in between the 3rd and the 6th round, and they can make those guys starters, and they can develop their potential and make those guys starting offensive linemen. And he thinks that you should save the 1st through 3rd rounds for guys who are, skill position players. Now, my retort to this, which brings us back to, it's funny, I'm kind of saying like we shouldn't only focus on the Super Bowl, but we keep seeming to go back there. My retort to Chris Forster would be, okay, actually, let me start over. If you're building a team from scratch, a brand new team, I can kind of get behind his comment. You need skill position players. Maybe you can make do with scraps as long as you have like one good offensive lineman. If you have good enough, it's probably more valuable to get talented playmakers. If you only had Juwan Jennings, let's say, who's even, good, but if you only had Ricky Parcell and Juwan Jennings, yes, maybe it'd be important to get that star difference maker, talented player, first round talent, although I just said Ricky and he was drafted in the 1st round. That just made me annoyed. But I can understand wanting to get a difference maker in the 1st round for a skill position player, because that quarterback wide receiver connection is so important in the NFL. Even quarterback tight end, we see Mahomes, Travis Kelce. We see, I'm thinking that the Cardinals are going to start to be better because now they got Kyler Murray, a difference maker, when he had D-Hop. Even though the rest of the team was kind of screwed, you saw that one connection get the Cardinals pretty far and at least make them competitive in games where potentially they shouldn't have been. So I can understand, like, if you don't have skill position players, it being important. However, if you're in a situation like where the 49ers are, where they have a plethora of weapons, I think then you can start re-strategizing and go, okay, well, we have 5, 6 starting level, very good difference maker offensive weapons. So now maybe it's more important to invest in our offensive line. I would go back to the Super Bowl and say, Juwan Jennings, Debo, maybe not Debo Samuel because he wasn't getting open, but in pivotal plays that we would look at that say the 49ers lost the Super Bowl, Jennings and Aiyuk were both open. And Brock Purdy could not get them the ball because the offensive line kept collapsing. So I would say, I think the offensive line is as important or more important than skill position players because you can't get the ball to them. You can't, because he's saying get the ball in their hands. You can't get the ball in their hands if your quarterback is getting run over, if your quarterback is injured, so you're on your 3rd, 4th quarterback, which is something the 49ers have struggled with in the past. I would just say, I don't know. Chris Forster got some heat around that comment. I also think it's a little bit like self-praisey, like, oh, you don't even have to get that talented of players. I'll coach them up. I'll make them, I'll make them work. First of all, I don't understand why why the 49ers are obsessed with just making it work on the offensive line. Second of all, he uses Trent Williams as an example, but that's not even a guy the 49ers drafted. And look at the later round guys. Who have they developed? Even early guys, Mike McGlinchey, the same problems he had when they drafted him were the same problems he had when they let him go. So I don't even understand where this development is happening from. Maybe Aaron Banks, I guess, would be an example.
But he said fourth round, so Aaron Banks doesn't count. He said fourth
Yeah.
round and later.
I don't know. I don't understand where these guys, the guys that they're developing is. And I would say you need, like, even if, let's say, because I think it was Vish Kumar, and I don't have it up right now, but I know that he quote tweeted it and brought up, I think, Colton McKivitz and maybe Jake Brendel and said, you know, they turn these guys into starters. But what I would say is if your potential, if with all the development, if with the best coaching, the most practice, the most determination, if just you tap out, I'm a former college athlete. I will tell you, I am so competitive. I get really into things. I gave running, I ran. I gave it my absolute all. I got injured a ton, and I didn't run most of the races. I was like a backup on the team. And my coaches were wonderful. They gave me every tip in the book, and I put my heart into it. But I'm just not like literally that gifted. Like, I'm not like a naturally super gifted person. There were people, my friends on the team, their bodies were made for it. Their parents were athletes, specifically running athletes. Like, it was in their DNA, their fast twitch muscles. Like, they could do stuff that no matter how much I practiced, no matter if I had the best coaching in the world, I could never reach their level, because they're like, and we were just talking about this with quarterbacks, right? Like, their potential is just higher. So in my opinion, when you're settling for lower round guys, even if you can develop them to hit their potential, it's still not as high as if you're getting like a guy like some of the guys that we talked about this offseason who had really high like, it just doesn't matter if Burford is the best version of himself if Burford's ability isn't the same as a guy who they could have drafted in the first round. Does that make sense? Like, they can't tap out at the same place because that's just like not as good. I don't know. I got really frustrated.
Like, I agree.
What was yours?
I agree with you, but yeah. I get where Forrester's saying, right? Because you could have a great O-line, but if you don't have any weapons, you're never going to essentially be able to score or put the ball in someone's hands. It's going to be a lot harder to score. Yeah. But we're like, what I agree with you is we have the playmakers that you can put the ball in his hand and they're going to go out and score. You don't have the O-line. That's where you go and get an O-line. We saw Mahomes and the Chiefs. We saw them go out and get an O-line to up their interior. Now, they had weaker offensive tackles, but they went in and they upgraded that. So I agree. I think Forrester's comments were interesting because we haven't developed anyone. I know Burford was drafted in the 4th round. He was a starter last year. He has the talent. He has the talent. He has everything he needs. It's more up here. It's in the mentals, and you can't really teach that unless a player has it. Who knows if he develops it going into year 3 or it finally clicks for him. But he has the attributes and the physical ability to be an NFL starting right guard. So it's just very interesting how Forrester said. But we could argue Colton McKivitz is starting worthy across the NFL. He's not one of the worst 32 right tackles in the NFL. There's not 32 right tackles better than him. Truthfully, they're not. Like, we can look across the NFL, and as I was saying earlier, NFL play is always down, and I think that's what's not talked about. So for me, I think it's interesting the way he mentioned it, and he said it's interesting. He said rounds, right? Because we could look at the players drafted in certain rounds. Nick Zakel, supposed to be a starter or in their future at center or guard, never saw it happen. Jalen Moore was hopefully going to be something, never happened. Who else have we drafted? Like, it's been a long pattern that we've seen year in, year out that we don't have a good O-line. So, like, how can you truthfully say you're developing these guys when you're not? And if you were developing them, they would be starting level players. So I think that's what's interesting. I do give him props for making what's his name? Jake Brendel. He made Jake Brendel a starting caliber center. So like, I get where there's 2 players we could function with where Jake Brendel was a journeyman. He became a starter for the Niners. His first year, he was in like top 5 category on some stats. No, I get what you're saying.
Where like I agree they're getting the most out of him, and that's why they pay him the big bucks, right? Like that is impressive. But it's like if you got a guy with higher potential and you develop that guy, then couldn't that guy be even better? And why would you not want that?
Yes, but you also have to realize that you could find quality O-line play at that range in the 3rd to 5th round, in my opinion. I think you could get quality O-line play. The issue is I think they're not drafting right. I don't think they're drafting the right guys in those rounds.
Are they going to find Trent Williams?
You can get quality offensive linemen in those 3rd to 5th rounds. Truthfully, you can. You can get undrafted guys as offensive linemen. It's just the Niners. I personally think the Niners don't know how to scout O-line, in my opinion. And we've seen it with Mike McGlinchey. We've seen it with a variety of guys that they've drafted. It's not the player. It's not.
Does, right?
Kingston.
Didn't someone on the beat say that the 49ers hurt the Chiefs by letting them draft him? So it'll be interesting to see.
Kingston? Kingsley. Yeah. So like we'll see how that turns out. But I truthfully think it's more than can they develop. I think he's done a great job with who he's given, right? We gotta remember Chris Forster's job is to develop who he's given, right? He can't do much with someone who's not that talented, and I think it's more so they're not drafting right. So I think that's the issue more so than can he develop someone. I think he could develop him. I think he's a good offensive line coach. Just get him the right player who has the physical abilities that he could develop. So I think that's where more so it is.
I just think it was a little bit self-praising. Like, I think fans would have enjoyed hearing, yeah, we can get
that's not his job. That's not his job. I understand
his point. Like, yes, we can get the most out of these guys, but would I like it if they gave me some talent to work with? Yes. When we hear from
but then how does that hold on?
I'm blanking on his name right now, but who's the guy who's the defensive line coach?
Chris Kocurek. But if he says that, we're seeing
he's been like, I bang on Kyle's door to get me all the guys. I want all the talent. I want to work with the best of the best. And he's the guy who's been praised and he does. He gets these 1-year contract guys who are struggling and he gets the most out of them. But when he's asked, he's like, yeah, they got to hold me back in the draft round because I'm banging my hand on the table to get the best guys every time. Because I know if I get my hands on a guy with unlimited potential, I'm going to get that. Like, look at Nick Bosa. We drafted Nick Bosa. Was he going to be great no matter what?
Yeah.
But then I'm getting the best out of even the best. And he's saying, I think what people would like to hear is, yes, if you give me lower round talent, I'm going to make them reach their potential. I'm going to make them tap out. I'm such a good coach. But yeah, if you gave me the choice, do I want a guy who has even more potential? Yeah. And if I did get that guy, could I coach him up? Yeah. And I think he kind of even though he doesn't say that, by alluding to, yeah, you need a Trent Williams on that line, he's saying, yeah, you can make do with mostly decent players with serviceable offensive linemen, but you need, if you're going to have a O-line that's a little bit below average, you need at least one guy who can carry the slack for the rest of the players. And what I'm saying is they didn't draft Trent Williams and they haven't shown that they prioritize drafting that position. And if you were starting from ground zero and didn't have a team, I think having a skill position player is more important. I agree with that. But where the 49ers are right now, they have plenty of skill position players. I think what would have been more beneficial to their team at this point in the regime would be a good quality offensive lineman with higher potential.
But then, Ashley, aren't we talking about it differently?
Aiyuk, if they didn't have Debo, if they didn't have Kittle, I would understand. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. But I think we're talking about it differently, right? If Forrester does come out and says, "Oh, John Lynch and Kyle Shanahan need to give me better players," if he comes out and says that, we're talking about it as Chris Forrester is not confident in the offensive line we have. The 49ers have a bigger problem on his hands, right? He's talking about if he goes to the podium and says that, how does it look confidence-wise on his players? How do his players feel, right? He has to give them a boast of confidence too. he's a coach at the end of the day. He can't
No,
go to
he
the
coulda
podium.
he could have was like, yeah, they're not the best, but whatever.
But no,
I don't
but,
know.
um,
He didn't.
But if he goes on and says, I want Kyle and John to draft better players, I want them to bring in first rounders, second rounders. It's
does say that.
completely. But I think Chris Kasarik says it, but Chris Kasarik says whatever the hell he wants, and everyone knows this. Like Chris Kasarik on the practice field will tell a player to their face, like he's a different kind of mind, right? So it's different when it's coming from a dude who will do it to your face versus Chris Forrester. He's not
more of like the cool.
Yeah, like he's like a motivational coach versus like if he goes to the podium and says, "Oh, I need better players." We're all saying the O-line is not prepared, the O-line is not good enough, and the O-line coach. Our topic, our title of this show is Chris Forrester does not believe in 49ers offensive line. Completely different conversation, right? So that's why it's like I'm not worried with what he says. It's coach talk. He needs to develop the O-line. The issue is, I think the issue is not being able to scout the O-line, not necessarily developing O-line, because he's gotten the best out of he can from everyone they've given him. Everyone.
I think it's important to learn from the best of the best, right? And unfortunately right now, the 49ers, as much as fans would like them to be, they are not the gold standard. And if we're looking from the best of the best, when the Chiefs were given the opportunity to prioritize their best skill position player, potentially at the time, the best skill position player in the NFL as a whole, or offensive line, what did they prioritize? They got rid of Tyreek Hill.
No, absolutely. And I agree. And I don't want to say your name wrong, but Dome. I don't probably say it wrong. That is the best he could get from players who are capped out. Like he's getting the best of those players. And he said that, like, I need players I could develop. He said he needs play, but he wasn't going to go out and say, I need better talent, right? That's disrespectful to his players that he's actually coaching. He did say he needs better players, but essentially he knows he could develop guys that are drafted from rounds 4 and on. I just think the Niners are not getting the right players to develop. I think that's the bigger issue rather than can he develop an offensive line.
I think that's fair. Like maybe we're asking the wrong question. Like maybe the question should be, why? Because obviously they're not drafting certain guys because they don't fit their system. And maybe Kyle Shanahan should be evaluating his system and saying, if this many guys aren't falling into guys that we're even considering drafting because they're not a good fit for our system, maybe we should consider changing our system. Because if the Chiefs don't have that problem and the Chiefs are over here winning back-to-back Super Bowls, going into creating the next dynasty, I don't know. I would be, if it's good enough for them, I would maybe reevaluate your process if I'm the 49ers. But that's
absolutely. And I agree with you.
If O-line is supreme, then every other position gets better. I agree, right? Like quarterback has more time to throw. Quarterback looks better because he's not taking as many sacks. And yes, sacks are also on the quarterback, but he looks better. The offensive weapons look better because they have more of a chance to get open. They have a little bit, even if it's just a half a second, they have a half a second longer. I don't know.
But the thing too, like, I also think too, like having a better O-line may also impact Brock Purdy in a negative way.
How?
Because there's times where Brock Purdy holds onto the ball a tad bit too long rather than just letting it rip. Like right now, like
maybe the pressure makes him throw right away.
Yeah, like to be honest with you, like there's times where he'll hold on to the ball a little too long, and he'll take a sack or he'll take a big hit versus just letting it rip. Like, and I think I'm not saying like obviously this is a good learning experience for Brock because he just lets it rip versus once he does get that O-line, hopefully he continues that mentality of I'm a gunslinger. I'm just gonna let it rip. So that's like for example, like JM 617 talks about Jalen Hurts. Jalen Hurts just holds on to the ball for like years because he knows how good of an O-line. Hoping for someone to get.
Hold on, am I correct?
Should we talk about? Should we talk about?
Has Jalen Hurts?
Should we talk about Jennings?
Yeah.
That'll be. We'll go down a long pigeonhole. We go to that one.
Okay, well, I just got so I know. You saw my face. You saw my face. Okay, Juwan Jennings got an extension before Brandon Aiyuk. That shocked a lot of people. In my opinion, that shouldn't be shocking. Juwan Jennings, he signed for about how much his 10
tender. That's how you say it. Tender was going to be. It was such little money, and they were able to actually lower his cap hit this year. It didn't surprise me that he got paid over Aiyuk, because I still think Aiyuk's deal is coming. First of all, I'm not worried about that. And I don't necessarily think those things affect each other. What I do look at is, once again, I mean, this kind of goes back to why didn't they draft an O lineman? Is with Ricky, why did they draft him? He's gonna have 3 catches. Like, Juwan Jennings already barely got the ball. If you're ranking wide receivers right now, Debo looks like he's in immense shape. I'm under the impression that Brandon Aiyuk will be here and will be playing. And especially if they pay him, he's going to get even more targets. So that's, and I'm just talking for this year, not going into 2025, but that's Aiyuk, Debo. Then I think Christian McCaffrey will be here. He's going to get catches. Kittle's going to get some catches. Like, potentially it's good for depth when some of these receivers get hurt. But I mean, do you think that Ricky's going to get more targets than Jennings if they just paid Jennings? I think what they did is they ended up, it actually made his cap hit lower for this year, which does help them if they want to extend Brandon Aiyuk or guarantee some of Christian McCaffrey's contract or whatever they're going to do there with their 2 stars. But I think when I saw that, some people were like, oh, what does this mean for Aiyuk? I want to say I don't think this really affects Aiyuk, what they were going to do with Aiyuk, but it does make me side-eye the Ricky pick once again, which I was already side-eyeing. So I don't know how revolutionary that is.
I think what's interesting is this Juwan Jennings contract is interesting because I don't mind paying him the 2-year, 15 or 2 year, was it a 2-year, $15 million contract with $10 million guaranteed. My issue is adding the void year to make it a 2026. He has a void of a cap hit, and the Niners will eat
really quick. I love Terradome's passion. Sorry, we don't have to get into it.
No. I agree. Like, you should be mad as a fan because essentially you have coaches and owners and people telling you that you don't know what you're watching or you don't know what you're looking at, right? Like, essentially that's kind of what it feels like. And it should make you mad. It should make you frustrated that your favorite team had the opportunity to go get offensive linemen in the 1st and 2nd rounds. And instead they got a receiver who probably won't see the field until next year. So I definitely agree with you. Like, you should be mad. You should be in a sense of what the hell is going on and questioning the organization. And that's why I question it all the time, is because they will talk to you like you're an idiot, right? Like, oh, you don't know what the hell you're watching. Like, you see reporters who use certain language that is given from them by the Niners organization to make you look like you don't know what you're talking about. And like, it's frustrating. So absolutely, I agree with the excitement and enthusiasm. But for the Jennings contract, having 8.3 dead cap in 2026 from a void year is very, very interesting. Because you're probably not going to want to extend Juwan Jennings in 2026. Truthfully, I'm not saying like you're not going to want to.
It's kind of weird that Jennings signed it. Like, I understand.
Well, why wouldn't he?
But let me explain. Because if he would have played on his 10-year or tender, he would have had 1 year, right? And then he could have gone to another team and got like a 3-year deal. Where now he's going to be with the 49ers for 2 more years. How old does that make him when he's up for a new deal? I don't think he's going to get he's going to probably
29?
get 34 deals after that.
29, but also so this is the thing though, actually, right? Because like, let's say he doesn't take a contract, right?
Yeah.
Right. He takes the 4.8 or something like that guaranteed on the tender. Let's say
really doesn't. For Bundy, I just want to say like that he's probably not going to get 15 million. They usually make about what they're guaranteed, so 10 million. But his cap number for this year actually went down, and they're paying him about what they would pay him anyways this year. So it's not like he's saying he's not worth it, but I mean, they were going to pay. They'd already put a 10-year on him, so they were already going to pay him $4.8 million this year, anyways.
He's likely getting that full 15 because of because of the dead number that they have in there. they have an 8.2 on 2026. It's a void year, so he's going to get that. It's essentially getting that money unless they trade him or they get off of that contract somehow. But you're still going to have that void contract where you're going to pay him his guarantees no matter what. For his deal, I get why you have you extend him. He's a really good player, good receiver 3. Now it's interesting because the Ricky Pearsall draft pick just shows you more that it's for a future pick, right? Like it's more so because you're replacing Debo next year. But at that point, it's like, what's more important, replacing Debo in 2025 or getting an offensive line that can help you win this year, whether it's a starting center, starting guard? Like that to me is a little more important, right? So like
everything is circular.
So it's like, I don't get it. I get extending Jennings. I think this is the same thing for BA because it's not like it's a 4-year deal or 3-year deal. It's a 2-year with the void, and you're essentially going to have BA extended, and then you'll have the conversation next offseason about Debo Samuel. So I think it's more so that. I don't think it means much.
It is. I mean, I don't find it that surprising just because the number is so low, like it's such a small contract. But I will say, like, I didn't anticipate that he was going to get a contract because I thought they kind of saw him as just a Kendrick Bourne type, which is just like a third wide receiver that they could get kind of anywhere. But clearly they have a little bit of respect for Jennings, and whether that's just that maybe where they are right now, they don't want to go through the timeline of getting another player acclimated. We saw in the Super Bowl that Brock Purdy has an affinity for Juwan Jennings and does like going to him. Now, my pushback, if I was Jennings, I would say they're playing a lot of man versus man coverage, and the best players were on Aiyuk and Debo, so it makes sense that Jennings got more targets because he didn't have that high caliber guy blocking him. But I don't know. Al Bundy says 4.5 is not that low, but he's getting 4.5 this year, and that's what he was going to get even on the tender.
But no, so check this out. I don't look at money that they're giving. I look at the cap numbers, right? So he said, "I don't know you're not a Sox fan, but the hat has to." I know I need to get a new hat, right? Hey Justin, send me a hat, even if it's a Cubs hat. I'll wear it. I don't care. Send me a new hat, and I'll wear a different hat.
Red Sox?
Huh?
Is that what that is?
Like Cubs? No, this is a White Sox hat. But if you, Justin, you want to send me a Cubs hat? You want to send me a whatever kind of hat? I'll wear it. I don't. I need to go out and buy a new hat. I truthfully do, but man, hats be.
You want to get a Giants hat?
I'll put on a better hat. You want the Grays hat? It's probably one of my favorite hats, actually. But for looking at his numbers, I don't see it as 7 million, 7.5, because 2024 his cap number is 2.8, 2025 it's 4.3. The issue is the void years of 8.3 in 2026. That's the bigger issue, is he gets that money if he's not on the team, or if he's whatever they restructure, then he won't get it. So it may be where they're planning for him to be with the Niners for his entire career. Maybe that's what he wants. Maybe that's why he kind of structured it this way. I don't know, but it's definitely that the void year is the bigger concern for me. 2.8 and a 4.5 million cap hits in 2024 and 2025. Those are nothing. So he's making less money than he was going to make on his tender in terms of cap wise. And that's more important, cap numbers.
Yeah. Do you think that the Juwan Jennings contract affects how they're going to go about paying Aiyuk, or do you think that it just says, do you think it says anything about them moving on from Debo? From all reports, Debo Samuel has been really in shape and showing. He's the only wide receiver that's
contract year.
Yeah, contract I know. They should always have Debo in a contract year. Apparently, that's what he needs to show up.
That's what it is. It's a contract year. It's essentially he's in a contract year where if the Niners decide to move off of him next year, what teams are going to be willing to pay him that contract that he's owed, or he's going to want another contract because he's on his last year of his deal. So essentially it's a contract year. That's why he showed up in shape. That's why he's determined to be a different kind of guy.
Al Bundy talks about injury. I don't want to wish or predict injury on anyone, but I will say that the one area where Ricky will get to shine is if there is an injury. At least we have lots of depth. And I will say, going into the season, I feel like the 49ers have maybe the most depth that they've ever had. I feel really good about their secondary and the depth that they have there. And then definitely in the pass catching area, I can see what he's talking about now. Although when I look at tight ends, I feel terrified. But Jennings is a pseudo tight end. So maybe they were like, well, we couldn't sign a wide receiver. They kept trying to sign a tight end too. Maybe they kind of kept Jennings around because he's like he can be a receiver. He's kind of a tight end.
And I've seen people say make him become your tight end. I think with 11 personnel, you're going to see a lot more 11 personnel, which allows Jennings to be that lead blocker, be that guy in the pass game, and in the run game. So I'm definitely excited to see that because it may lead to more passing for the offense. So I think that's more what I'm thinking in my head. Like, okay, if you have an offense with Pearsall, Debo, Jennings, and Brandon Aiyuk all on the field, you could still run the ball. Like, even if you have Kittle on the, let's say the offense is, and they decide not to have Kittle on the field every once in a while to take care of his body, obviously coming off a core surgery, which is a big surgery. Let's say they have him be that big slot or line up in the slot, and they have the 3 true receivers on the field. You could run an offense like that because all 3 of those guys, or at least 2 out of the 3, possibly out of the 4, could block, right? So it's different. Like you're not losing blocking ability. So definitely, I like the signing. I like keeping Jennings. Great special teams guy. Now, I don't know how it's going to work with the new special team rule and everything like that. It's a lot different.
Listening to the special teams coordinator talk about that. You could tell how passionate he was.
It's going to be different.
It makes me excited for preseason because apparently they're going to test a lot. I know that the Chiefs said that they might not even have their kicker who sucks anyways because he is sexist. But besides that,
yeah, funny about that, he wants to tell women they could be in the kitchen, but he can't tackle somebody. Oh Lord!
Yeah, the Chiefs. Andy Reid
don't get me started with that one because
they might even experiment with having a safety in the kicker position for to test some new stuff with that rules. So I'm really interested in seeing what they're going to do. I also like the coordinator said that everyone's kind of keeping it to themselves, like they don't want to share secrets.
First coach to figure it out. That's what it is. Yeah, first coach to figure out how this new rule is going to be, or the new rule change is going to be, because essentially the whole Niners staff needs to figure it out. If the Niners coordinator Schneider can't figure it out right away, he's going to go and watch film. Who figured it out?
Yeah.
Every coordinator, and it's gonna race to be the first coordinator to get it right. And if he does be the first one, the Niners probably have a better special teams unit to start the season and probably throughout the NFL this year. And this was they need a better special teams unit.
I wonder if they'll have like Mustafa, because reports out of camp is that he's been really good. And the Chiefs are over there talking about having safeties in there. That would be a good way to work a rookie especially if Hufanga is able to play, and maybe they can't slot him in necessarily at safety right away. Having him try out there could be really interesting. I was also wondering if they were going to have Debo or Christian McCaffrey back there. Now that player's supposed to be a little bit safer, people might. I mean, you saw even in pivotal games, Kyle had Debo back there. Mike McDaniel going back to the Miami, they had Tyreek Hill in a lot of those. So it'll be interesting to see how they end up doing that. There's even more to talk about, but we've been streaming forever. So I don't know. Do you want to really quickly touch on, well, let me ask you, do you think, because June 1st is coming up, and for everyone who's watching, if you don't know, June 1st is an important date. That's when a lot of cap room will open up. So I'm kind of eyeing, do you think that an Aiyuk deal gets done around that June 1st date, or do you think
that's tomorrow?
Way off.
That's actually tomorrow.
It was Saturday. Oh, tomorrow's Saturday. I'm an idiot.
So no, I don't think it happens tomorrow. I think it may happen within the next month or so. I don't think it happens tomorrow though. Like, they're gonna let that cap number come up. They're gonna figure out what they have and what they can pay.
Does Kyle Shanahan cancel the third OTAs? He usually does.
I think he does. I mean, no one's even there. No one's even practicing.
I hate that. It'd be nice. See, they should extend BA. See, Jason Niner Masley? Nope, there's no L. I don't know where I came up with that. But he says that BA gets signed by the end of the week. I think it'd be cool to sign BA and then have, instead of canceling it like they normally do, have him show up and maybe get morale up. When I was listening to George Kittle talk, I was scared. George Kittle looks sad and defeated. He refused.
He's rehabbing.
He refused to utter Kyle Shanahan's name, and he refused to say that they would be back to the Super Bowl, and he refused to say that they could win the Super Bowl. Like
next show, we will talk about if the 49ers have lost confidence in Kyle Shanahan.
I definitely, everyone, please like and subscribe to my YouTube channel. Like and subscribe to Marco's YouTube channel, because I will say, I texted you, I texted some other friends when I was listening to George Kittle talk. I was pretty shocked by his morale. It seemed really
we can talk about it right now if you want. We have a few hours.
I understand that he's upset about injury, but it didn't feel like, it felt like a guy who realized that he sacrificed a lot of his 20s thinking that they were gonna, like, that there was an ultimate goal, and that he was, because mind you, in 2018 he had as much star power as, let's say, Travis Kelce, but George Kittle did what a good teammate would do, and he trusted Kyle Shanahan and Kyle Shanahan's system, and that system made other guys the stars as it went on. Deebo Samuel was the star, then Brandon Aiyuk, whatever. And I feel like George Kittle was a good sport about these things and believed that he would sacrifice himself, whether that meant blocking more, giving up more targets, because he thought, I trust in Kyle Shanahan, I trust in this system, and we're going to win a Super Bowl, and history is going to reflect well on me and on other stars on this team, on us being unselfish players, because we trust that Kyle Shanahan's going to get us there and get us over the hump. And it's like, I don't know if he realizes that like, maybe he's like, because the first time they lost the Super Bowl, he had this like excitement. He had this this willpower to do it again. And I feel like now he realizes how difficult that was, especially when we look at last year, when he admitted that he was injured for the last about 10 games of the season, that he pushed through injury. Those injuries didn't show up until he had surgery, so he didn't even know what was wrong. He kept pushing through. He performed fairly well for a lot of those games, and then did have a drop off in performance towards the latter half of the season. But you think about him playing, pushing through injury, hoping that it's all going to be worth it in the end, and putting his confidence and his faith in the core group and thinking, we believe in Kyle Shanahan, so he's going to take care of us. They get to the big game. It's a huge blunder. He doesn't even get that many targets, so he can't even make that much of an impact, even if he wanted to. So first of all, the ball's not in his hand. He can't make an impact. Both him and Brandon Aiyuk were torn up about that after the game. And also, it felt like George Kittle, I mean, previously, when we talk about different 49er creators who bashed Kyle Shanahan, George Kittle was one of the guys who went to the podium and would say, hey, leave my coach alone. He knows what he's doing. We trust his system. We're a team because of him. We rally because of him. Now, when prompted to exude confidence, he refuses to. He'll say, I believe in my guys. I believe in our ability to win, but he would not say, I believe in Kyle Shanahan. I believe in this system. I believe in our ability to get back to the Super Bowl. I believe in our ability to win the Super Bowl. He talked about the core, and I think he's probably side-eyeing Kyle Shanahan because he considers himself kind of the old regime. He sees we know that he was a fan of Jimmy Garoppolo. He saw that Kyle Shanahan evaded responsibility by blaming Jimmy, whether that was right or wrong. I'm not saying that. But now he just saw his best friend is Kyle Juszczyk. They just went on vacation together to celebrate their anniversaries that they had with their wives this offseason. He just saw Kyle be put in a situation where it was either we're going to cut you or you need to take a giant pay cut. He just saw Eric Armstead, which he talked about when he first came back. Eric Armstead got released because he was offered a 10th of his normal salary. Both Fred Warner and George Kittle talked about that and talked about yelling like, holy shit, that's crazy that they did that to him, because he's, they see themselves in guys like that. They see, okay, if you can do that to Eric, you can do that to me, and my time might be coming up. And it seems like
it's
George
writing
Kittle
on the
might be
wall.
like,
They start to
yeah,
they start to realize, all right, at first
if we
my
don't
my,
win
my
it,
first
it's
couple of years, it was I'm the man, but now I'm getting to that age where I may not be that man because I'm getting paid. They may not be able to pay me. It's a lot that goes on with this situation, and essentially the Niners really want to see, they want to be a team that wins it all, and you could see the frustration by him. He may be frustrated from an injury as well as not getting the ball in the Super Bowl as much as he wanted. Like, that's a lot goes on into everything, and I truthfully believe that the Niners they may be losing the locker room with some players that's at this point, and I don't know if it's a true statement, but it's definitely something that may be happening because when you look at it, you see it with a lot of guys, and if unfortunately at some point after you're there, you're getting so close year in year out, back to back Super Bowls and NFC Championship losses, and that takes a toll on a lot of players, mentally, physically, and at some point it's natural instinct as a human to say, I don't think we could do it, or I don't think he's the right leader. And at some point that's gonna happen. I don't know if it's
like
happening now.
they were the best team. Like, I think like last year they've always had reasons, right? Like when they win against the Chiefs the first time, the Chiefs were probably the better team. They had the better quarterback. When they lost in the NFC Championship game, it's like, okay, I'm on my fourth quarterback, and my, third quarterback that took over and was already committing miracles got his elbow blown up. They always had reasons. And I feel like this was the final year where Kittle can reflect and go, I don't know if I can do that again. Like, it seems daunting to have to put that much effort in again. We were the best of the best, and it wasn't good enough. And I'm starting to realize that I made sacrifices earlier on in my career, thinking that I was going to be remembered in the history books as a champion. That's the same. Champion is what Brandon Aiyuk kept repeating when he was crying, cleaning out his locker room last year. They thought that they were going to be championships, and they all have made sacrifices when it comes to targets and being stars, getting personal accolades. I can't say that word. They've all made sacrifices in dedication to Kyle, in saying, okay, we believe in your system. We're putting our faith in you, that if we do all we can and we execute your system, that if we get to the final moments, you're going to steer us in the right direction. And then they didn't. And they're older and they're injured, and they saw how hard it was of a hill to climb to get there, how much luck went into getting there. They feel like they've been the best team for 4 years, and it took them that long to even get back. And now they just must be like George Kittle is probably thinking, I don't know if I can do this again. My body's breaking down. We know he doesn't like to have surgery. He's had a torn labrum in his shoulder for like 5 years that he refused to get surgery on because he wants to dedicate his offseason to improving upon his skill and not into rehabbing. So that the core injury must have been bad enough that they had him get surgery. He's also probably, and I don't think he was like downing the training staff. He even gave them compliments, but he's probably frustrated because he himself admitted that for 10 weeks he was saying something wrong, and nothing was coming back on the scans. And they basically kept saying, you're fine. We don't know what's happening. And he had to have surgery for them to even figure out what was wrong. So I imagine that he went through a grueling season, and usually he's talked about this before. At the end of the season, your morale is really low. You're down if you don't win the Super Bowl, and you kind of build yourself back up during this off season. And it feels like these older vets are like, dude, we're not ready. We're still tired. We're still beat up. We're still recovering. We're not at OTAs because literally we can't even perform yet. And the idea of having to go through all that again to even get there. And now I'm not even confident that this guy is the right guy to get us over the hump. That must feel so defeating. When George Kittle talked about his dream, he used to say, my dream is to win the Super Bowl. Now he said, I'm living my dream. I'm playing football. Not I'm living my dream. I'm competing for championships. Not I'm living my dream playing, for the best organization. These are things he used to say. I've touted George Kittle as a guy who's super high on Kyle Shanahan specifically and on the 49ers organization specifically. When we go back to that Dallas game, the Fuck Dallas t-shirt he was wearing, when we go back to multiple times that Kyle Shanahan has been on this hot seat or under fire, George Kittle has been a guy who's gone to the podium and fought and stood up for Kyle, who stood up for the 49er organization, who showed other teammates, Brandon Aiyuk, Deebo Samuel, who maybe were irritated with the amount of targets they've gotten. He said, look, I was the star. I know what you guys went through. I had this star year, but look what I did. I wasn't selfish. I let you guys have it. And I wasn't selfish because we as a team need to not be selfish. Because if we're not selfish, Kyle Shanahan, he's going to get us there as long as we do what we're told. And then they did that. And they had the best team. And they lost because Kyle didn't know the rules. Like, that's fucking insane. You know what I mean? Like, and
it's just crazy. It's a crazy.
Mr. Corey brings up Jimmy Garoppolo, and I'm not saying that Kittle is right about Jimmy Garoppolo, but what I'm saying is in Kittle's mind, he saw all the nonsense of Jimmy getting thrown under the bus, and then Trey, and then like he's been through so much quarterback controversy, and like it feels like when he was going through that, he kept saying it's going to be worth it because we're going to win a Super Bowl. It's going to be worth it because we're going to win a Super Bowl. It's going to be worth it. Like he kept saying like I believe in Kyle Shanahan. Like this is all BS. Like he would go on podcasts and be like, I can't believe we're doing this again. I can't believe I'm on my third quarterback. But you could tell he still had that, like, we're going to be back to the Super Bowl. We're going to get it. I believe in this core. And now he's like, the core is disappearing. We're all getting old. They're throwing these guys out. They're making them take pay cuts. My body's getting destroyed. I'm going to be 31. We got to the Super Bowl. We had the best team. And this guy choked. And now you want us to do it again? And it's like all of a sudden years of maybe little doubts where he was like the guy who stood on top of the hill and was like, no, like this is for a reason. It's like finally occurring to him, like, oh my God, what if I don't win one? What if my career's over and I'm not a Super Bowl champion and I just stood on a hill for this guy and
and I think he would still stand on. I think he still will stand on a hill for him because they're friends at the end of the day. And I think that's the problem is they're such great friends and everything like that. So I think they will still stand on the hill. I just think right now he's in a spot where dealing with an injury, coming off of that injury, he's going to be down mentally as a person and having to deal with that situation. Just hopefully once we do start and he does start practicing, it's a different attitude, right? Because like you did get that sense of, damn, like I'm down, I'm not myself, I don't know. I'm just blessed to be able to play football. So we'll see how it changes, man. I'm definitely gonna be interesting on how everyone handles it throughout the season, right?
I agree. We're probably gonna end it here because we're almost going on in 2 hours. I just missed you, Marco. But thank you guys, everyone. I mean, we still got people in the chat adding even now, so I appreciate everyone watching, everyone commenting. Someone saying, "Are you wearing a Raiders hat?" Is that what?
No. So he was earlier. He was mentioning that I need to get a different hat. And I was like, all right. I was like, you're buying me a hat, right? So in the chat, I was like, Justin, make sure you send me that Cubs hat you're gonna get me. And he's saying wearing a Sox hat is like wearing a Raiders hat. That's crazy.
I agree with him. What are you doing? Marco? But everyone, please make sure to like and subscribe to both my YouTube channel and Marco's YouTube channel. I had a great time talking to you today, Marco. And everyone, enjoy your weekend. And we'll see. Maybe there'll be some breaking Brandon Aiyuk news this weekend. Maybe not, but potentially. So keep another thing you guys can do is turn on notifications, because if there is a breaking contract news, I'll make sure to go live, and I'm sure Marco will too. Aside from that, I'll be back on Monday, and I'll cut this YouTube up too. So lots of clips and stuff coming up I know Miss Corey said he joined late, so make sure to tune into that. Thank you guys so much. Have a great weekend. Stay hydrated because it's hot out. At least it's hot out here. Yeah. Bye guys. Boo, boo, boo.